screen, and you can begin your presentation. So best wishes to all of you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you can see, our topic is on Gulliver's Travels, and I'm dealing with misanthropy or a hidden hearty love for individuals expressed by Swift in Gulliver's Travels. So, which points towards two questions. First, is Jonathan Swift an actual misanthrope, or did we misconceive him from his real intentions of a philanthrope? So, Swift as the creator of Gulliver. First, we need to clear one thing. If we consider that Swift is Gulliver or Gulliver is the mouthpiece of Swift, then it is not exactly so. For with a close connection to Swift's career, we may say that he did supported some political ideologies of the Tories, but Gulliver is different. He is naive and a good citizen, and does not interfere with anything. That is why secondly, I've pointed him out as an abstainer who is just an observer. Like Gulliver is the representative of a human child who is not bound by any particular belonging or race. So, where he is presenting that group of people who do not have any role to perform. And now, Gulliver is the narrator. We cannot call him a hero. If we conventionally associate heroic qualities to him, we will see in the book one where he helps Lilliputians in order to fight and win the battle against Blefuscu. Yet the heroism gets gradually degraded and ultimately somewhat vanishes towards the end of the book as he flees from Lilliput. Next, he visits Brobdingnag, where he is confronted with the king. He conceals what is despicable about his countrymen to the king. On the contrary, he is proud and accepts the madness and malice of European politics. But the Brobdingnagian king understands everything from his description and remarks mankind as the most pernicious race of little odious vermin that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth. Here, the king is the mouthpiece of Swift. And the difference between Gulliver and Swift is very clear here. That is, Gulliver is hiding the truth, but Swift is being very honest with the reader. Now, Gulliver sets out for his adventure on different lands, far from the world of ordinary human beings, where he came across to the Lilliputians, Brobdingnagians, and especially the Yahoos and the Hononyms. In the last book, we see there is a change in his behavior. Though we actually do not know if he is mentally changed or not, but yes, he behaves differently, of being a man and not behaving like a man. Basically, he becomes the victim of socio-political instability. He becomes sick of it, and that is why I pointed him out as the victim Gulliver, swift, harsh, and sad tooth. Uh, Later, I will be talking about that harsh and sad truth in the next slide. Um, we know that Swift, as a writer, he largely wrote about the social and political problems of his time. His numerous pamphlets, letters, and other works. Swift lived in an age of rationality and reason. When John Locke's theories of national religion were gaining popularity, René Descartes' theories about the use of reason, moreover, full of political conflicts inside England and with its neighboring countries, were rising out. So, Swift somehow deals with it very intellectually, but satire in it. Gulliver's Travels carries the rational criticism of values to a point where it threatens and undermines the very reason for living, lucidity and search for balance. Therefore, intellectual emotions, which concentrates into something very intensified emotion, which at times cannot be distinguished from an impassioned bitterness. Swift is criticized as exceptionally cynical and bitter, sarcastic towards readers, but it is eventually not so. On the opposition, the spirit restraint of humor and irony causes a pathetic vehemence. But with the force and aggression with which Swift narrates his story, he narrates the typical socio-political condition of his age, which is exceptionally relevant and to the point. And that needs to be bitterness, needs to be bitter. So critics remark him as an misanthrope, and which in my point is not so exactly. Swift is Swift hated the rational and political animal called man. It is not that he hated humankind or something like that, but he did hate rational and political animal called man. He in his age there is a deep scar on the society, and that needs a reformation spirit, needs and bitter criticism, and Swift actually does so. Therefore, apparently it seems to us that he is against man, a sinister, a pessimistic, but we cannot deny that he is being very honest and truthful to us. He's creating a moral figure through the story that will not only strive for truth, it demands truth. For this truth is destructive of all deceitful illusions and the suffering which accompanies the destruction. There is a search for balance, and we know that the socio-political condition was very unstable and conflicting, and that is why Swift is searching for a balance and presenting in his writing a mirror to humankind to see themselves how rationally they are behaving like an animal. Um, Next, we cannot venture to say that Swift did it accidentally, or it was just an accident. That in the later part of the book we see Gulliver is behaving like not behaving like a human being at all, but uh, Swift is presenting the harsh real truth of society through Gulliver. He is not a central but a social reformist. In the book 4 of Gulliver's Travels, chapter 12, we see Gulliver is saying that, however, supposing myself to be a minister of state, I could never give my advice for invading them. I rather wish they were in a capacity or disposition to send a sufficient number of their inhabitants for civilizing Europe, by teaching us the first principle of honor, justice, truth, temperance, public spirit, fortitude, chastity, friendship, benevolence, and fidelity. So here Swift tries to indicate the reader to better understand what what he's trying to say, uh, to behave more like a flesh and blood type man and not a rational animal. In later, he writes to Pope saying that on a hearty love for individuals and distinguished from a general hatred for that animal called man, that general hatred stems for an indignation against a race which refuses to acknowledge the need for harmony, proportion, and a balance between its rational capacity and its animal instincts. So, of course, Swift is a well wisher of mankind, otherwise, he at first will never try to correct them, in my opinion. And with this, I end my presentation. Thank you. And now, Bodhisattva will continue with his topic.
Thank you, Farzana. Good afternoon, teachers. Good afternoon, my classmates. After the topic on misanthropy, I would like to present how Swift used satire on Gulliver's Travels. I made 4 basic contents in which I will first speak on the philosophical background, followed by the 2 books, book 1 and book 2, and at last I will be solving a question that is Swift and Gulliver antithetical to each other? So now I will begin with the background study. Swift has at least 2 aims in Gulliver's Travel, besides merely telling a good adventure story. Behind the disguise of his narrative, he is satirizing the pettiness of human nature in general and attacking the weak in particular. Swift's craftiness was successful. His book was popular because it was compelling adventure tale and also a puzzle. Now, the word satire is derived from the Latin word satura, meaning the combination of heterogeneous elements. So far as the generic aspect is concerned, satire cannot be easily defined, and while considering it, we discuss it from substances and motives. Swift employs this literary device as the weapon to expose the shortcoming of the contemporary English society. He reaches the hallmark of artistic excellence in allegorical satire in his work, like A Tale of Tab and Battle of the Books. Though Gulliver's Travel is generally considered as a children's fable, we cannot ignore its underlying significance and the satirical intention of the author. In disguise of the fictitious travel account, Swift artistically launches his satirical shaft against the contemporary political fabric. Through this fictitious travel account is akin to Sir Thomas More's presentation of Utopia. As soon as Swift turns to describe the politics of Lilliputian, it ceases to be Utopia and becomes England itself. Now, in Book 1, Chapter 2, Swift gives an ironical description of the Lilliputian king by saying that the king is taller by the breadth of his nail than anyone of his court. Moreover, his appearance is enough to strike awe among the beholders. Here, he ironically satirizes the English king George I, who was not graceful and majestic in his appearance. And now, speaking of the Lilliputian children, Swift debunks the whole sentimental attitude around children. At first, for instance, Lilliputian children were wisely taken from their parents and given to the state to rear. In an earlier satire, A Modest Proposal, Swift had proposed that the very poor in Ireland sell their children to the English. In Lilliput, there are 2 struggling parties called Famaxon and Flamaxon from the high and low hills of their shoes. by which they distinguish themselves. This typify the high church and low church parties or the Tories and Whigs. The patent enemy abroad is the island of Blefuscu, which signifies France, engaged in an obstinate struggle with its neighbor for a whole generation. Thus, Swift not only satirizes the contemporary political strife between Whigs and Tories, with reference to the conflict between high heels and low heels, but also satirizes the external conflict between England and France, alluding to the conflict between the Lilliputians and the Blefuscians. With a view to satirize the hair-splitting ideological conflicts, he speaks on the conflict between the big Indians and the little Indians. The long-drawn war came to an end after the signing of Treaty of Euclid, which is here satirized by the reference to the manner of urination applied by Gulliver to extinguish the fire, caused by certain carelessness of the Lilliputian king while reading a romance. It is to be noted that the Treaty of Euclid was signed by the Tories. Naturally, the Whig opposed the manner of signing it, though they supported the treaty itself. To a certain extent, Gulliver represents Swift himself, and certain incidents in Gulliver's adventures are an allegorical representation of certain incidents in Swift's life. In Gulliver's Travels, the captain's chief enemy is a certain lord named Bolgolam, who is pleased, says Gulliver, without provocation to be my mortal enemy. The person is clearly intended to represent the Earl of Nottingham. The morose and sour complexion attributes to Bolgolam suggest the identification. The transformation of Gulliver to Bolingbroke, a statesman who fled from England, was the development of the character of Flimnap, who was obviously designed to represent Walpole. Flimnap, the treasurer, says Gulliver, is allowed to cut a caper on the straight rope at least an inch higher than any other lord in the whole empire. This symbolizes Walpole's dexterity in parliamentary tactics and political intrigues. Besides Flimnap's, another minister of the Lilliputian court is mentioned, and he is Reldresal. Though commentators have not identified him, it is clear that the person meant is Lord Carteret. Gulliver ironically says, "My friend Reldresal, principal secretary for private affairs, is in opinion, if I am not partial, the second after the treasurer." Moreover, Swift alludes to some other, mainly Lintot, who is identified with Stanhope, Secretary of State for War, Lalcon, who is identified with the Duke of Devonshire, and Belmouth, who is identified with the Lord Cowper. Now coming to Book 2. In the second book of the Travels, Swift reverses the size relationship that he uses in Book 1. In Lilliput, Gulliver was a giant, and in Brobdingnag, Gulliver is a midget. Swift uses this difference to express a difference in morality. Gulliver was an ordinary man compared to the amoral political midget in Lilliput. Now Gulliver remains an ordinary man, but the Brobdingnagians are moral men. They are not perfect, but they are consistently moral. Only children and the deformed are intentionally evil in some cases. Set against a moral background, Gulliver's ordinariness exposes many of its faults. Gulliver is revealed to be a very proud man and one who accepts the madness and malice of European politics, parties, and society as natural. What's more, he even lies to conceal what is despicable about them. The Brobdingnagian king, however, is not fooled by Gulliver. The English, he says, are odious vermin. Here we see a vast change in character between Gulliver in Book 1 and Book 2. Swift praises the Brobdingnagians, but he does not intend us to think that they are perfect human. They are superhuman, bound to us by flesh and blood, just bigger morally than we are. Their virtues are not impossible for us to attain. but because it just takes so much maturing to reach the stage of a moral giant, few humans only can achieve it. Brobdingnag is practically a moral utopia. Among the Brobdingnagians, there is a goodwill and a calm virtue. Their law encourages charity, but yet they are underneath just men who labors under every disadvantage to which man is a heir. They are physically ugly when magnified, but they are morally beautiful. We cannot reject them simply because Gulliver described them as physically gross. If we reject them, we become even more conscious of an ordinary person's verminous morality. Swift is also a name caller. Mankind, as he has a Brobdingnagian remark, is the most pernicious race of little odious vermin that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of earth. Now coming to the last question, which I will ponder in a short way. The question is Swift and Gulliver antithetical to each other? To which I will say the kind of a man Swift was and the kind of a man Gulliver is are antithetical to each other, obviously. Gulliver is a simple, naive creature. Swift is one of the most complex personalities in English letters. Gulliver is an innocent-eyed narrator. Swift was an ironist. Gulliver tells us what he believes in the truth. Swift reveals ambiguities. Gulliver reports to us precisely as he can, often not realizing the implication of his observations. Swift, in contrast, lets us know the implications. Gulliver, for example, is impressed by the Lilliputian grandeur. Swift lets us see beyond the Gulliver's narrative line and realize the irony in the juxtaposition of the minuscule Lilliputian and their grandiose notion. Gulliver gives us his perspective of his adventure, then Swift pulls us further back so that Gulliver himself is seen in perspective. Now, to conclude, Swift was a highly moral man and was shocked by his contemporaries' easy conversion to a reason as the be-all and end-all philosophy. Swift, in fact, created the whole of Gulliver's Travels in order to give the public a new moral lens. Through this lens, Swift hoped to vex his readers by offering them a new insight into the game of politics and into the social follies of humans. Thus, I end my part and I would request Rumana to continue with her topic. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My topic of presentation is Gulliver's Travels as a travelogue. So let's begin. First of all, we should know what is a travelogue. A travelogue is a truthful account of an individual experiences of traveling, usually told in the past tense and in the first person. The word travelogue supposedly comes from a combination of the two words travel and monologue. Next, there are three types of travelogue. First is authentic travelers, who heightened their materials with flights of imagination. Second is pseudo travelers, who very often plagiarized the accounts of the authentic travelers, spicing them again with their own concoction. And third is idealistic or utopian voyagers, who painted the innocent bliss and unspotted living of far off communities. All these types of travel books were welcomed by the travel-crazy 18th century public. Swift was well read in the travel literature of the time, and his book proves it to the readers. Next, Gulliver's Travels This book's full name is Travels into Several Remote Nations of the World on Four Parts by Lemuel Gulliver, first a surgeon and then captain of several ships. Uh, the part 1 opens like a traditional travelogue. There is an air of solid reality above everything. The stolid matter of fact Gulliver inspires complete credibility in the readers. Swift gives us a complete background of Gulliver that makes his book more credible. He born to a family in Nottinghamshire. He was third among five sons. He studied at Emmanuel College. Then he went to study in Cambridge as a teenager. But his family's financial situation was not so well, so he was sent to London to be a surgeon's apprentice. There he learned mathematics and navigation under James Bates. When his apprenticeship ends, he studies physics at Leiden. After that, he tried to settle down with a wife after several voyages as a ship surgeon before setting out on the travels which form the narrative of the book. Then, imaginary traveling places of Gulliver. In first book we see Gulliver travel to Lilliput and Blefuscu. In second, Bob Dingnang. In third, Laputa, Balnibarbi, Gardabdrib, Lughnagg and Japan. And in fourth book, Wenheims and Yahoos. One and only Japan is the real place among these places. We see the pretense that these are actual travels is kept up throughout the book. Swift also provided the dates and map references in order to make the times and places mentioned look real. He located his imaginary countries close enough to known geographical points and the usual trade routes to permit the rescue of his hero, yet sufficiently deep in the uncharted regions of the Pacific to prevent conflict with known territories and to make his story all the more credible. His wonderland is just the real world with a slight difference of scale. He experiences himself a giant among pygmies and pygmy among the giants. The people of these strange lands are invested with the same feelings as we have. We don't feel that we have entered the wonderland of ghosts and giants, fairies and goblins. We just feel that we have been transported to some remote corner of our own world. In part 2, we see English sailors rescuing him on his way return. Swift's narrative is so racy and vivid, however, that we hardly know where imitation ends and parody begins. So, this was more or less my presentation. Next presenter will be Guddu. Uh, Guddu, ready with your presentation.
Thank you, Romana. Is it visible? Hello?
No, it's not visible.
Just a minute.
Share your screen first.
Good, it is visible now.
Yes, Guru, your screen is visible, so you can continue.
Guttu, you are mute.
Now I am audible.
Yes, yes.
Good afternoon to all my teachers and batchmates. My topic is political representation in Gulliver's Travels. Rumana already has been discussed it as a wonderful travelogue, but I will discuss from its the political point of view. The Gulliver's Travels is not just a novel or wonderful travelogue, but covers political and religious issues that occurred during the 18th century in England under the King George II. So, how it is presented, I will discuss. Lilliputians are the embodiment of England, and Giant Gulliver is the embodiment of Europe, in the sense that England is also small in size, but despite being a small country, England has Europe and other countries under their control. Likewise, the Lilliputians has Gulliver under their control. Then the next point is the Gulliver's voyages or England's journeys in other countries. It is in the sense that England has the agenda of spreading its culture and beliefs and journeyed in other countries to spread it. It also can be said they had the motive of colonization. Then the next point is dancing on tight ropes symbolizes are the regardless agreements with the take this will be taken decision by the authority. So it is in the sense that like the Lilliputians, powerful men of England agrees with the taken decision to hold their position of power. For example, Henry Walpole, as a leader of parliament, has skill in parliamentary tactics and political intrigues. Then the next point is the toy-like treatment of soldiers by the Emperor of Lilliputians is a jab at King George. So it is in the sense that instead of striving to protect the country, King George used his army for his personal gain and pleasure. The army of England did more for the king than the country. Then the next point is instead giving a reward, Empress becomes Gulliver's enemy, and the three fine silk threads awarded as prizes to the winners. It shows that in England, royalty doesn't have gratitude. Even it is well deserved by someone. Awards are given to them who are the favorites to kings, instead of being based off on merit and achievement. Then my next 2 point is the conflict between the big Indians and little Indians and Thamescan High Hill and Slemscan Low Hills. So High Hill and Low Hill are the representation of the two opposing political party of England, Whig and Tory. And the next, that is the first, the conflict between the big Indian and the little Indian is the conflict between the Roman Catholic and Protestants. And the enslaving of Blefuscu is showing the corrupt nature of the king, a king without compassion and forgiveness. The emperor of Lilliputians wants Gulliver to enslave Blefuscu, but Gulliver refuses it. It shows that it shows that how England forced its religions upon France. And the last is that through these examples of Gulliver's Travels, Swift is not only able to give readers accurate picture of the political situation in England, but also explain the situation through the understandable examples that are direct taken from the text. Thank you to all. Here I am ending my slide.
Okay, so has the group of Gulliver's Travels, they have completed their presentation, or is Pushpargo also presenting with them? Uh,
No, sir. We
okay,
have
so
completed.
okay, so this is the entire presentation. Yeah, it's very good. All of you have presented very well. I will move with the question answers in the later half or the later part of our discussion or of our, course of presentation. First of all, let us, complete into the presentation of the other students first. And thereby we move into the question answer session. Uh, for the, one thing that comes very clearly of all the different aspects that you have touched for Gulliver's Travels is that, we cannot consider Gulliver's Travels as a novel for that matter. So we need to keep this in mind, because the character of Gulliver, as all of you have pointed out, is very fluctuating. Once he's Swift, in the other part he's someone else. He's becoming Bolingbroke, for example, in book one, and several other political characters or imaginary characters are merging together. And as you have pointed out, is that the consistency of the character that we find generally in a novel is largely missing from that. And also, the most important point that I found in the discussion was, yes, Gulliver might be a misanthrope, but Swift is not. And you can refer back to the letters that Swift wrote. He wrote letters to Pope and also others, where he's telling that I might hate the animal called man, but I am not. I do not hate Tom. I do not hate individuals for that matter. So that was important. So yeah, this was in my opinion a very fine presentation, largely comprehensive, touching on different points. So let's move on to the presentation on Wordsworth, and I think let's start with Amit, because Amit is having an individual presentation on Wordsworth. So Amit, are you ready for that?
Yes, sir, I'm ready. So
Okay,
I'm
so
presenting my.
yeah, go on.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is my individual presentation on Wordsworth and his Tintin. Tintin, a critical study of Wordsworth's psychological view of nature. So, before going to romantic thoughts, we should know the new classical thoughts or before romantic thoughts. So, the critics and theorists from Philip Sidney to Joshua Reynolds broadly represent the thinking of the age of enlightenment and its debates about the relative importance of reason and imagination. These critics insist that the ancient Greek and Romans provide the best models for the 18th century art, and the art is remarkable for its artifice and artificiality, and that the highest form of art come from and are appreciated most by those with well trained sensibilities. So this is basically talking about the neoclassical thought. The neoclassical In the neoclassical era, those poets or the writers, they used to write by recreating the classical style, their classical forms. They are very, their meet. They used to. Oh, okay, let's keep that. Then comes romantic thought. William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge's preface to the second edition of Lyrical Ballad articulates the romantic philosophical and aesthetic worldview. The romantic conception of art and artists directly challenge the belief of the Enlightenment, particularly in insisting on the superiority of all things natural over anything artificial. So in when romanticism come or romantic thought come, their uh, main thought was the naturalness. in neoclassical literature, they believe in artifice or artificiality, but in romantic literature or romantic poetry, they believe in naturality. Wordsworth's perception of poetry, a poem, Wordsworth proclaims, is not the product of reason or of art and artifice, but is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling, which its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. Feeling is thus established as the central element in a poem, more important than action, situation, character, or mimetic accuracy. According to him, a poem is good insofar as it is an authentic expression of feeling generated in a natural setting. Um, so I think it is clear to you. I will not elongate this point, but I will request the other my classmates to take a screenshot of this, because you can also add these points or uh, these things in your answer. Lines composed a few miles above Tintonabe, popularly called Tintonabe, is first meditative poem by Wordsworth. This poem is the testament of Wordsworth's attitude to nature, his attitude to man, and his moral vision and his philosophy of life. Metamorphosis in Tintonabe. So, uh, we read Ovidian Metamorphosis. So, in Ovidian Metamorphosis, what we see? We used to basically see the physical transformation, but Wordsworthian metamorphosis is not appropriately similar to the Ovidian metamorphosis. The Wordsworthian transformation is more inner and psychological rather than outward and physical. The idea of metamorphosis is, in any sense, a subject of Tintonabe means to reconstruct, of course, the change that Wordsworth has called growth. So we can say metamorphosis is transformation, and change is somehow one sort of transformation, and change also can be growth. So we will read the poem in four stages. First stage, courtship pleasure; second stage, emotionalism; third stage, intellectualism; and fourth stage, etherealism. First stage. uh, Please take a screenshot of this. Courtship pleasure. This is the first stage. In the first visit of Tintonabe, the poet derived from nature courtship pleasure through glad animal movement. When the poet first came among the hills, like a roe he bounded over the mountains, by the sides of the deep river and the lonely stream where the nature led. At that time he behaved more like a man, flying from something that he dreads than one who shot the thing he loved. This is quite possible, as while a beautiful object of nature fascinated the poet, the deep caverns, the chasm, and sky-high cliffs could produce a feeling of awe in the poet, a boy. In this stage, the tall rock, the mountain, the deep gloomy wood, the colors and their form were an appetite for the poet. The poet at this stage enjoyed the sensuous pleasure in the contact with the nature and did not have a reflexive mind fully ripened. So, suppose this is the first stage. Suppose um, one of us have a very deep fantasy to went uh, to see a sea or a mountain, and lastly you went there with your mom and dad. Your mom and dad it's saying don't go there in the sea, otherwise you um, the waves will come on you and blah blah blah. But at that point of time, you are too much excited that you will not listen to them. Some sort of animal instinct will work in your inside, and you will just ignore your mom's or your parents talk, and you will just run to the sea to enjoy or to inculcate its pleasure, its animal pleasure. So this is called kosher pleasure or animal pleasure. Second stage, uh, in the second stage, the poet is no longer find an etching joy supplied by kosher pleasure and gizzy rapture. The time is past, and all its etching joys and gizzy rapture. The poet, however, does not mourn the loss, because against the loss he had abundant recompense. In the shape of other gift he followed. Now the poet looks on nature not with the eye of thoughtless youth, but takes shelter in her being depressed by the still sad music of humanity that goes on perennially afflicting the human soul. The poet now become a universal man sharing the world's maze. The word sorrow. With a mind made sober by the experience of life, he now become reflective and hears from nature the harmonious and cathartical music welling up from the heart of the universe. Third stage, the poet announces that he is, at this mature stage of his life, still a lover of meadows and the woods and mountains and all the green on earth, the sight uh, and sound of this mighty world, which require the aid of imagination for the full appreciation. And finally, he was acclaims nature as the anchor of his purest thought, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of his heart and soul of his moral being. That's to Wordsworth. Nature is only offers sensuous pleasure, the rocking delight, but enables him in his mature years of discover not only a bound between nature and man, but a bond that ties up the whole creation. This is the third stage of development of a poet's attitude towards nature. This is the final stage. Now, here from, please listen my words carefully. In this final stage, the poet acknowledged the influence of nature shaping his moral vision. In this stage, Wordsworth philosophy, his unique philosophy, uh, it is clear to us. He owes to feeling of unremembered that have no slight or trivial influence on the best portion of a good man's life, and that inspire one to do little nameless, unremembered acts of sympathy and of love. The poet owes to nature another gift and aspect more sublime, that blessed mode in which the burden of the misery. In this blessed mode, Wordsworth became a living soul, and now, by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, the poet can see into the life of things. And now, we're going to relate this with Gita. This is the highest stage of gradual development of Wordsworth's attitude to nature. In the stage, man find unity in diversity, the oneness in the whole state of creation. The experience is spoken in Bhagavad Gita. In Bhagavad Gita, the sixth in the sixth chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Avyas Yoga, there it is written, सर्वभूत्यस्त्यमात्मानं सर्वभूतानि चात्मनि ईक्षते योगयुक्त्यात्मा सर्वोसमयदर्शना. So, if we try to understand its meaning, in Bhagavad Gita, it was written, a yogi whose mind is in the self, thus absorbed, discovers unity among diverse things. Everywhere he feels the presence of everything in himself as much as his own self is in every object or sphere. So, according to, if we take the definition of yogi from Bhagavad Gita, then we will see that our Wordsworth is becoming yogi, and he is not just imagining. He is now an yogi, and he can introspect himself on everything, and he can see everything in himself. And here, the concept of etherealism, or the the philosophy that I am nature. Wordsworth is saying that he is becoming one of the element of nature. He is becoming the nature. Journey to noumena to phenomena. So, in the Kantian idealism, um, if we go through Kantian idealism, we can see that. Yeah. Okay. Uh, if we go, then we see that the first stage, when Wordsworth is encountering with this the pastoral landscape, uh, that was the new manner. When he is with his senses, he is absorbing the things. Then, uh, with his imagination, as his imagination is go deeper, and um, then he went to the ideal world of phenomena, where that was also talked in the final stage, where he become the nature, or he is in an ideal stage. The poet is saying that he is becoming an living soul, so he is now in an ideal position. Memory, time, and nature. Memory, time, and nature always plays an important role. The nature is unforgettable because of the human mind and memory, which don't let us forget the past and the time when we behold the nature. Memory plays a vital role because it has an eminent role in recollection and contemplation, which is the two stages of creating a poetry or art. So, uh, remember this thing: recollection and contemplation. This is the two stages of creating poetry. There are others, but I just wrote this too because this is related to my um, my presentation. Poet always believe that nature is vital force which is not forgettable. With times, a memory can be dimmed through a long absence. Have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. How often has my spirit turned to thee, and now with gleams of half extinguished thought, in solitary reaper. So here you can see that the influence or the impact of nature on Wordsworth is very much deep. When the poet come back to Wehe Valley, to that place again after 5 years, and this is the time when he's saying that the nature don't let him forget the valley. It maybe that was those thoughts are half extinguished, but those thoughts are there in poet's mind, and nature can do this. Just the nature can. In Solitary Reaper, poet shows how memory plays its role when the nature or the object is not present. The music in my heart I bore long after I was heard no more. Long after it was heard no more. So in Solitary Reaper, when the poet after the song of the solitary reaper, the reaper, when the poet went far, at that point of time, the poet is saying that he have the music in himself. He bore that in his heart. So this is the case of Wordsworth. But if we see in the later romantics, so there what we'll see, there we'll see that in case of Keats, in Nightingale, he is saying, "Thy plaintive anthem fades past the near meadows, over the still stream, up the hillside, and now its beauty deep in the next valley gleams." So, in case of Keats, he's very much sensuous. It's not about thought; it's about his senses. When he cannot hear the a song of the nightingale, his imagination is over. And he came to the world of the real world from the ideal world, or the imaginatory world to the real world. So, in this portion, I have some questions uh, to the participants or the teacher, or rather, I will solve those. Magnus claimed that Tintin Abbey fabricates a false view of the life of the time by presenting an idealist image of society, which serves the interest of them of the then ruling classes. William Golding, describing the sense in his influential picturesque travel book Observation on the Riverway, noted that the poverty and wretchedness of the inhabitants were remarkable. They occupy little huts raised among the ruins of the monastery and seems to have no employment but begging. Uh, Marjorie Levinson pointed out the abbey itself is not described and is absent from the poem. Why? She asked. Would a poet draw attention to a famous ruin and then ignore it? So uh, these are the questions. So why Wordsworth chooses the place, or why he chooses the place, but then he ignored the place? Would the poet draw attention to the famous ruin and ignore it? So anyone want to tell that? Anyone? Okay, let me tell you. So uh, I was saying in the final stage of the poem, uh, in the final stage of the poem, uh, the poet becoming an yogi. And there are many other criticism that people are saying that Gilpin is saying that there is too much poverty there. But why Wordsworth just ignored that poverty? He just talking about an ideal landscapes, and it was too much beautiful. But it's not. When Wordsworth went there, it was the valley was just ruined, and that was the real condition of the valley.
Big pies. And after the industrial revolution, there maybe half mile um, near uh, their industries are growing, and
The valley's condition was, it was totally ruined. The condition was very bad. Um, so some critic thinks that Wordsworth talks about the spontaneous overflow. So when poet went there, he just tried to feel the nature. There was a quote, I don't remember mm, the writer of the quote, but it was beauty, strangeness, strangeness added to beauty. So it is the feature of romanticism. So maybe the valley was ruined, but it is there. And Wordsworth saw the valley in a very strange way. Maybe he was, some people think that maybe he is hiding from the real, but it's actually, the poet has his own world, his own created world. He's not seeing anything outside of his world. So that's the point. The poet is holding an has his own inside world, and he's just enjoying the pleasure he get from the nature. Sexuality in Wordsworth poem Tintin Abbey. This is my my observation, and I don't know whether it is um, right or wrong, but it's my thinking. Uh, if we think about our first sexual encounter with our partners, so I think that more of us uh, will see that that first encounter is not very much clear in our mind. Our excitement is too high, and Wordsworth, when he's writing the poem, he is just saying that have extinguished thought. It is not just because of time, because and in the poem, the nature is depicted as a woman, uh, as a, as he's saying that as a lover, as a human lover, uh, run after his beloved. The poet is running. I quote, I bounded over the mountains by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely stream, however nature led. So that's the way. Wordsworth is somehow attracted by the nature with his uh, in sexual way also. And the encounter between Wordsworth and the nature is half extinguished, and in case of human beings, our emotions are too high. Our we can we don't remember that incident very clearly. We cannot remember our sublimity of nature. I don't think we have. I have to tell much about this. Maybe in after in the next presentation, they will also tell about the sublimity of nature, how it is depicted in Wordsworth. And then bibliography, and then uh, thank you, sir, for arranging such a uh, for an opportunity for us to present our present such a, to
Yes,
present
thank you.
ourselves.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you for that, and you presented quite well with a lot new points, a lot of insights into reading the text. But 3 points I'd like to point out to you, and thereby we move on to the next presentation. These 3 points would be that I doubt whether Wordsworth was actually becoming a yogi. I would have accepted this if this presentation was on Emerson. If you were writing on romanticism and Emerson, and you pointed out that Emerson was actually been you know uh, becoming a sort of a yogi, or trying to relate that to nature, or he's telling I am becoming nature, it would have been more acceptable, because I don't think that Wordsworth in this particular poem primarily is not talking about that he will become nature, because if you remember the last part of the poem, he is talking of memory. He is talking of Dorothy. Why Dorothy is important? Because Dorothy will be the only person to remember these things. She's telling that, will you not remember me? Is he's asking deliberately this question. So I pointed out this in the class, that memory becomes a sort of a personal meat to transcend or evade this entire process of, or entire phenomena of, change and death. So the poet wanting to transcend death through nature, but primarily through memory. And yeah, Levinson also came. I think that was the first issue we discovered in the very introductory class. And one more point I would like to add from Levinson is that what we discovered, I think, in the early classes, is that why the abbé is not present. I think it's primarily because the central focus of this poem, as we all pointed out, that it's a part of that autobiographical poem that Wordsworth actually never wrote. So keeping in mind that point, we might say that the central focus of the point is the mind of the poet. It's rather showing the development of the mind of the poet. So it's not actually concerned about the external nature. Is more focused upon the mind of the poet. So the mind becomes the central point of the poem, and the relationship of this mind with external nature, and thereby begins a reciprocation between the two. So I think this is how the poem moves on. So you just add all these points also and rethink just a little bit in all those points. Otherwise, it's a very wonderful presentation. I'm very happy the way you brought all those intertextual elements. You keep reading in this manner. And yeah, so this is all for Amit. Oh, and one more point, you brought in the element of sexuality or sensuality. So yes, this is also a very established critical convention, that the poem begins as if as a sort of a reunion between lovers, as if one is coming back to the lover, or a lover or a male lover is coming back to the female lover. But there is one more element to it, that the love affair, from a more passionate sort of a bonding in the initial stages, transcend to the peace and serenity of nuptial bonding or of a marriage, that you also read in Blake's poems, right? In the initial poems, Tiger and Lamb, this particular word is also there. I think nuptial song is there. So that sort of a Christian reading of the poem is also very established. So you can go and read that part of it as well. So thank you, Amit, for such a wonderful presentation. You just read more on all these parts as well. And I think all the other students are also very benefited. So now we move on to the next presentation that is also on Tintin Abbey. It's a group presentation by many of our students. So yeah, you all can now continue.
Good afternoon, everyone. I request Shrantika to present the screen. Shrantika? Okay. Today we will discuss about some topic based on Tintin. Now my topic is impact of French Revolution in Tintin. William Wordsworth line composed a few miles above Tintin on revisiting the banks of the Way during a tour July 13, 1798, usually abbreviated Tintin, was written close to the end of the French Revolution, a period of time in France characterized by excessive political and social upheaval. Tintin Abbey is Wordsworth's meditation on nature and how it uh, creates a sense of the sublime and becomes a guide for his spirit. Wordsworth is using Tintin Abbey as a vehicle to express his transcendent feeling from nature. The poem can also be interpreted as a direct response to Wordsworth's experiences relating to the French Revolution and his return to nature. From the first two lines of the poem, 5 years have passed, 5 summers, with the length of 5 long winters. We are aware the sense of time significant. Wordsworth is excited to be back with a description of his landscape in this view of nature. Wordsworth has time to reflect on his previous visit to the banks of Way during the 5 years as the French Revolution progressed. Now that he is back, he appreciates more of the calm landscape as opposed to the chaos that grew during the revolution. The second stanza of the poem describes the reflection Wordsworth has been having since his last visit to the bank of Way, and how it has begun to change his outlook on life. When he has been in society creating these reflections on nature, he has experienced a quiet restoration and remembered the joyful feeling he had forgotten, not only for being an adult general but also when the revolution was just getting started. This blessed mood that Wordsworth achieved by reflecting on nature has lighted the heaviness of the world exemplified by the revolution, allowing him become a living soul and see into the life of things. The poem's third stanza appears to be the most revealing in terms of Wordsworth and the effect on the French Revolution on poetry. The verse have given us a glimpse of how living in the landscape has influenced Wordsworth and helped him understand the world more clearly, and Wordsworth decided to allow nature to guide him for the rest of his life. To this go with the flux approach is the polar opposite of the philosophy that dominated the French Revolution, which was radical action to bring about a dramatic change. The poem ends with Wordsworth conversing with his sister Dorothy, which seems to present Wordsworth's future concerning not only himself but the French Revolution. Throughout the Tinton Abbey, we can see trace of the French Revolution influence on Wordsworth and how it brought about his return to nature. I've done with my topic. Now Pushpargo will continue with his next point. Over to you, Pushpargo.
Thank you, Ahona, for introducing me. Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to discuss about William Wordsworth's treatment of nature. Wordsworth believes that it is to nature that he owes the most in the formation of his mind and character. Nature for him is the nurse, guide, and the guardian in his early years. The poem, however, encompasses all the successive stages of Wordsworth's nature creed. The range of his lifelong communion begins with glad animalistic movements of boys' days, the coarser pleasure of instinctual sensory reaction to the beauteous form of nature, the hills and mountains, the deep rivers, and the lonely streams where he bounded like a roe. It passed from these delight, these raptures of the senses, the stage of the sensuous fulfillment, uncon- uncontaminated by thought. The beauty of nature is haunted the poet, and he feels them in the blood and along the heart. Next point is the poem states his perspective towards nature, what he has felt and what he has got from it, and the psychological change in the lap of nature. Wordsworth shows us how nature creates impact upon us, and as maturity increases, it gives us the highest gift, that is a blessed mood, in which the heavy and weary weight of all the unintelligible world is lightened and we become a human. He states that in these boys' days he felt the nature with his body, but now, this time, he knows how to look into nature, and that's why he is collecting food from it for his future years. Also, the dynamic sad music of humanity is felt by the poet, and that rich and qualitative music has the ample power that sustains all our ego and narrow feelings, and it helps us to become a man of humanist. And my next point is Wordsworth's realization towards life and his regression that Dorothy couldn't witness such a beautiful experience and a message for the future generation. Wordsworth regrets in the closing section of the poem that his sister Dorothy is not as fortunate to receive the moral and spiritual benedictions of nature. Therefore, he makes a prayer to nature to bestow upon her a purer choice of human and contemplative love and the spiritual apprehension of pantheism. My dear, dear sister, and his prayer I make. Wordsworth also inspires Dorothy with the pagan optimism that nature never did betray the heart that loved her. And finally, Wordsworth dismisses the role of the body in the apprehension of the cosmic animation that rolls through all thinking objects. To apprehend it, the body must be laid asleep and the soul be made living. Even the motion and circulation of blood must be suspended. The living soul glimpses through an eye made quiet by power of harmony. the indwelling single spirit of the power of the universe. With the two mortal eyes closed in the serene and rest mood, and with an eye of spiritual vision, the poet can then see into the life of things. The formless eternal becomes visible to the poet in that blessed mood. Nature ultimate benediction on the poet. Thank you. My discuss over it is over, and I request to Aditi to continue with her topic.
No, it is the turn of Shayantika.
Oh, sorry.
Good afternoon to my teachers and classmates. My topic of discussion is the three stages of poet's mind toward nature. Tinton Abbey is a faithful record of different stages of the poet's thought regarding nature. His thought of nature may be traced in three different stages. Through these stages, the gradual development of the poet's thought has been recorded in this poem. The first stage is attitude toward nature in the poet's boyhood. In the first stage, in this boyhood, Wordsworth felt a boyish pleasure in the presence of nature. At this stage, he had an animalistic pleasure in the beautiful scenery of nature. He found pleasure in roaming about in the midst of nature. Like a deer, he flitted from place to place and ran races in a restless manner over the mountains, by the sides of rivers and streams, wherever nature led him. At this stage, the poet's love for nature is very natural. His close contact with nature as a child has enabled him to enjoy the pleasure of childhood. At that time, he remains engaged in animal activities and derived cursor pleasure. The second stage is attitude toward nature in his young age. During the second stage, Wordsworth loved only the sensuous beauty of nature. The sounding cataract haunted him like a passion. Nature was as if his beloved. The poet was fascinated by nature's enchanting physical loveliness. He felt a deep love for the tall rocks, mountains, and the forest. At this stage, he experienced aching joys and dizzy raptures in his contact with nature. But he had no philosophy of nature. He loved only the sights and sounds of nature. At this stage, he cared only for the outward beauty of nature, with he, uh, which he saw with eyes and ears. The final stage is attitude toward nature in his matured life. In the third and final stage, his love for nature becomes spiritual and intellectual. The unintelligible mystery of the world has now been unveiled. In this phase, the poet has gained a spiritual vision. The spiritual contemplation over nature has disciplined his mind into a quiet mode of mystic realization. Wordsworth emphasized the moral influence of nature. He spiritualized nature and considered her as a great moral teacher, as the best mother, guardian, and nurse of man. Thus, the three stages of poet's life shows the profound attachment to nature. The poet finally returns to nature, realizing its greatness, and expresses his attitude toward nature in gradual stages in the poem Tinton Abbey. This is the end of my topic. Thank you. Now Aditi will discuss about the next topic.
Good afternoon, everyone. My topic is Impact of Industrial Revolution in Tintin Abbey. Industrialization, modern civilization, deforestation, pollution has always been against nature. However, when there is a binary between nature and culture, as well as nature poets like Wordsworth have always supported nature. The human race is leading the earth towards destruction day by day to satisfy their needs and greeds. In modern history, the process of change from an agricultural and handicraft economy to an economy dominated industry and machine manufacturing is called industrial revolution. This technological change introduced new ways of working and living and radically changed the society. This process began in Britain in 18th century and from there spread to other parts of the world. Although the Wye Valley is a rural and solitary area of East Wales, the influence of Industrial Revolution was felt here too. Since the commencement of the Industrial Revolution, the town of Tinton in the Wye Valley of East Wales supported ironworks. In line number 17, Wordsworth's notes indicates the signs of industrialization when he considers the wreath of smoke emanating from the terraces of the rustic farms. Since the publication of the poem, many scholars have traveled to the valley and put forwarded their experiences. Levinson confirmed that the region was shown major um, signs of industrialization and commercial activity. In line number 21 to 23 of Tinton Abbey, Wordsworth also questions the presence of stray in the hills, which Levinson later confirmed were casualties of England's tottering economy and wartime displacement. Advanced technology and infrastructure from the Industrial Revolution facilitated travel across Europe in 18th and 19th centuries, and thus a uh, thriving tourism culture was born. Romantics often went on a walking tour to explore the world to gather experience from the tour. They considered the tours as a way of both moving through a knowing world and knowing in a world that was changing through enclosure and industrialization. This thriving tourism culture inspired Wordsworth to visit Tinton Abbey. That's all I had to say. Now Nikita will discuss about her point. Thank you, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, then I will now discuss my topic, Role of Dorothy. Role of Dorothy. In the final verse, Wordsworth addressed that his my dearest friend is none other than his sister Dorothy Wordsworth, through line number 121 in Tinton Abbey. Dorothy plays a major role in the poet's life as close friend, supporter of his vocation as writer, editor, and secretary, almost his all in all. So the poet addresses Dorothy in his poem like his all in all companion. Wordsworth's Tinton Abbey uses the dramatic monologue, a poem in which is addressing a listener who never speaks but is referred to in order to take you an emotional state by trying to say himself, his sister, to a silent listener Dorothy. It's also a process detailing and works out in poem like eyes, he reads Christ's words he is in his command. He asks, he may for a while listen to and see this normal time, now rewarded for him in his community with his sister. So in this lines, we learn that the speaker Wordsworth is addressing Sister Dorothy. She is with him and she is the one he has been speaking to all this time through his sister. He is able to how he once was. He looks at the scenery around her as he did as a younger man 5 years ago. He expects his sister to engage with the nature, go on solitary walks, and when she grows older to keep the memories of nature and in her and to use them was difficult from her throughout the point he moved from his young to his present. But now, instead of moving to a future self, he thinks out when he will die, and he begs his sister not to forget this moment in nature they both shared and how much of a lover of nature he was. While one group of scholars identify Dorothy as his helpmate, others view her as her brother's muse. James Suderholm argues that Wordsworth uses Dorothy for his own poetic ends, etc. Regardless, Dorothy provides Wordsworth with inspiration throughout his poetry and his life. So, in my last point is Wordsworth has spoken of his dear sister Dorothy in more than one poem, in his Sparrow, Snakes and Nothing, etc. So this is the end of my discussion here, and it is the end of our discussion today. Thank you everyone.
Yes, thank you so much, all of you, for this wonderful presentation on. Yeah. I wish PT ma'am has joined a bit earlier so that she could have has gone through all this beautiful your take on Wordsworth, primarily Tinton Abbey. But anyways, yes, this was quite illuminating. You touching on all the points, all of you, the group dealing with Dorothy and Tinton Abbey in particular. So we will come to the questions if we have any, the later part of our discussion, because we have one more presentation left, and that will be on hard times. So those of you are presenting on hard times, you can go on with it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our presentation is on hard times. First of all, I would like to request to Borna to present the screen. At first, I would like to give an introduction of the text Hard Times. Hard Times is the 10th novel by Charles Dickens. It was first published in 1854. This book actually satirizes the social and economical conditions of the era. The story of this novel is set in the fictitious Victorian industrial Coketown. The novel is bitter indictment of the industrialization with its dehumanizing effects on workers and communities in mid-19th century England. Hard Times is unusual in several ways. The novel follows a classical tripartite structure. Book 1 is entitled as Sowing, Book 2 is entitled as Reaping, and the third is Garnering. Hard Times present the bitter consequences of materialism, greed, and egotism with unerring clarity through the lives of its principal characters Josiah Bounderby and Thomas Gradgrind, Dickens is a compelling storyteller and a great entertainer. In this novel, he creates unforgettable characters such as C.C. Jupe, Louisa, Stephen Blackpool, Rachel, James Harthouse, and Mrs. Parsit. Dickens wished to educate the readers about the working conditions of some of the factories in the industrial towns of Manchester and Preston, to strike the heaviest blow in my power, and as well to confront the assumption that prosperity runs parallel to morality. This notion he systematically deconstructed in through his portrayal of the moral monsters, Mr. Bounderby and James Harthouse. Dickens also believed that in the importance of the imagination and emotions, that the people's life should not be reduced to a collection of material facts and statistics. The description of the circus, which he describes as caring so little for plain fact, is an example of this. Then, here I am dealing with the themes utilitarianism and fact versus fancy. So, at first, utilitarianism is the doctrine that actions are right if they are useful or for the benefit of a majority. And utilitarianism, here the utilitarians were one of the targets of Dickens' satire. Dickens was appalled by what he saw as a selfish philosophy. In Dickens' interpretation, the prevalence of the utilitarian values in educational institutions promoted the contempt between the mill owners and the workers, creating young adults whose imaginations had been neglected due to an overemphasis on facts at the expense of more imaginative. And then fact versus fancy. The novel begins with Mr. Thomas Gradgrind sternly lecturing in a room full of school children on the importance of facts, because he believes that facts are the key to a good education, and he educates them according to his philosophy. Fancy or imaginations, the opposite of the fact, is epitomized by Slarry's circus. Slarry is reckoned a fool by Mr. Gradgrind and Bounderby, but it is Slarry who understands that people must be amused. Gradgrind's own son Tom revolts against his upbringing and becomes a gambler and a thief, while Louisa, Gradgrind's daughter, becomes emotionally stunned and virtually soulless, both as a young child and an unhappily married woman. So this was my presentation, and I would like to request to Borna to continue with her topics.
My topic is morality. Dickens portrays the wealthy in this novel as being morally corrupt. Bounderby has no moral scruples, and for example, he hires Stephen Blackpool for a nobility. He is cynically false about his childhood. The role of status on morality. Dickens is also concerned throughout hard times with the effects of social class on the morality of individuals. Some contrasting characters relating to this theme are Stephen, Rachel, and Tom and Mr. Bounderby. Stephen's honesty and Rachel's caring actions are the qualities not shown in people from higher classes. In contrast to these behaviors, Mr. Bounderby has seen by him completely casting aside Stephen's request for help. Stephen's concept of right and wrong is untainted by the manufactured values of utilitarianism exists into Tom and Bounderby. That's all I have. Next, Anindita will discuss.
Okay, so but we haven't heard the next presenter, right? So Anindita, are you there? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you were supposed to present this part, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you go on. We haven't heard you. You were not audible in the later part, so you can continue.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I am going to continue with the rest of the points. Women and marriage. Hard Times developed the conventional theme of 19th century fiction that it was the parents' responsibility to get their sons into financially remunerative profession and their daughters into a financially secure marriage. Gradgrind is no different from a typical Victorian father who has the welfare of his daughter at heart. He understands that his middle class daughter needs money to set up an establishment and that it was commonsensical to find a man of means like Bounderby. Gradgrind's philosophy on facts. It was a fundamental principle of the Gradgrind philosophy that everything was to be paid for. Nobody was ever on any account to give anybody anything or render anybody help without purchase. Gratitude was to be abolished and the virtues springing from it were not to be every inch of the existence of mankind. So at the conclusion of this novel, Mr. Gradgrind, having learned his lesson in hard way, devotes the rest of his life to faith, hope and charity instead of facts. And he realized that emotion and imagination are also essential for human existence. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now, for the hard times part, I know that we haven't finished the text, a very long date back, and I think it was yesterday that we were actually discussing the final part of the text. So, yeah, you can ponder on the names primarily because the names are very important. The names are actually a sort of a key to understand the text, or if not the text, obviously the characters. And yes, the other aspects of utilitarianism, for example, you have pointed, all of you have pointed out, but you can read it more categorically into the social part of it, into the economic part of it, into the educational part of it, and the others. You can also bring in the he's actually critiquing the principle of Bentham, actually. So you can also draw a trajectory of how utilitarianism is moving on. And just to remind you of the example that how the school system, utilitarianism is a very fine philosophy, actually. It talks of, as you mentioned, that it's the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So what's wrong with it? Dickens points out that, it's a sort of a very hypocritical system because it's actually not working in that manner. And in the part of the educational standpoint, it's actually creating sameness. Remember how Coketown is been described. It's talking of same road, same city, same area, same journey, and how days are like how days pass on like similar in similar circulation, in similar continuation, and how years pass on like the previous years. So this sort of sameness is what he is trying to avoid, because that ultimately reduces beings into hands. And as we were discussing, that is not just metonymy, but these metonymies are actually heavily loaded with metaphorical interpretations. So thank you very much for the presentation, and I thank all of you for your beautiful and wonderful insights and reading on different texts, different aspects of it. So I am actually very happy with it, and I think that this will actually help you for the future, sort of a you know the occasion that's actually coming a few days after. So best wishes for that. Now, if there is any cross question that you want to delve into, you can for sure. And I'd also request Didi ma'am, she's here, so I'll also request her to bring her observation. And I'll also request PT ma'am wasn't there for the romantic interpretations of the text, but anyway, she was there in the initial part, and now she's also there. So I'd request both the teachers to uh, unmute themselves and just bring their observation, and then we will move into a short cross questioning if we have any, and thereby we close the session. So Didi ma'am isn't here, I think. Is she here? No. But PT ma'am is here.
Yes. First of all, I'm sorry I couldn't be there. বেস্ট পার্ট যেটা মাঝের পার্ট ছিল যেখানে রোমান্টিক্স নিয়ে বলা হয়েছে আমি শুনলাম টিনটন ল্যাবের শেষে আমি এসে আবার ঢুকলাম আমার সেকেন্ড সেমের সাথে একটা ক্লাস ছিল ওটাকে আমি অল্টার করতে পারলাম না সো আমি প্রথম দিকে গুড্ডুর অবধি শুনেছিলাম. So they were talking about Gabriels Travels. Farzana Bodhisattva আর গুড্ডুটা I quite liked your observations. লাস্টে এসে তো আমি এই হার্ড টাইমসটা শুনলাম সেক্ষেত্রেও আমার ভালো লাগলো দুটো প্রেজেন্টেশনই খুব ভালো লাগলো অবজারভেশনস অ্যাজ সাচ আর এই দুটোর মধ্যে আমার সেরকম কিছু নেই টেক্সটগুলো পড়ে যে তোমরা এতটা ভেবে লিখেছো দিস ইজ আ গুড থিং তবে এইগুলো তো কোথাও থামে না সো ইউ হ্যাভ আ নেভার এন্ডিং জার্নি এখানেই করলে যে এটাতেই তোমার থট প্রসেস শেষ হয়ে গেল দিস ইজ নট দি কেস আরো ভাববে যে কটা প্রেজেন্টেশন আমি শুনলাম সে কটা একদম ইনিশিয়াল লেভেলেরই ছিল ইউ হ্যাভ টু ওয়ার্ক অন ইট আরো বেশি করে ভাববে আরো কোনো ক্রিটিক্যাল আসপেক্ট তোমাদের মনে পড়ে কিনা আরো কোনো নুয়ান্সেস তোমাদের মনে হয় কিনা কোনো টেক্সচুয়াল আসপেক্টে রিলেট করতে পারা যায় এরকম তো সেগুলো নিয়ে আরো ভাবো যেটা যেটা আজকে হলো যেটা একদম একদম শুরুতে হলো which is a very basic part তোমাদের একদম ইনিশিয়াল বেসিক অবজারভেশনস গুলোই কিন্তু আজকে আমি এটলিস্ট যে কটা শুনলাম তার মধ্যে ছিল এই ইনিশিয়াল জিনিসটাকে ফাউন্ডেশন ধরে কিন্তু এবার আরো এক ধাপ এগোতে হবে আস্তে আস্তে ঠিক আছে মানে কোনো কিছুর জন্য ডোন্ট রাশ থিংস আপ আজকে যেটা হলো সেটা প্রিলিমিনারি এবার এরপর নেক্সট যেটা হবে সেটাই কিন্তু আরো কিছু অবজারভেশনস ক্রিটিক্যাল অবজারভেশনস যেন থাকে যে জিনিসগুলো আমি তুমি আমরা সবাই জানি টেক্সট পড়েই জানতে পারবো টেক্সট পড়লেই আমরা পেয়ে যাব সেইগুলোকে একটু কমিয়ে এবার আমি চাইবো যে তোমাদের নিজস্ব অবজারভেশন তোমাদের নিজস্ব ক্রিটিক্যাল থিঙ্কিং যেটা এতদিনে অনেকটা ডেভেলপ করেছে সেগুলো আরো বেশি করে ইনকর্পোরেটেড হোক ঠিক আছে আর অ্যাজ সাচ আমার কিছু বলার নেই পুরোটা যদি থাকতে পারতাম তাহলে হয়তো আরো কিছু বলার থাকতো আই গেস ওয়ান্স এগেন আই এম এক্সট্রিমলি সরি আই কুডন্ট বি দেয়ার best of luck for your future presentations thank you so much
Thank you,
Thank you,
PT.
ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am?
So, okay,
বলো
Amit has a question, I think.
বলো অমিত তোমার ভয়েস কেটে যাচ্ছে একটু আর একটু ভালো করে বলো বা সেরকম হলে লিখে পাঠাও তুমি কোনো অসুবিধা নেই তুমি চ্যাটেও লিখে পাঠাতে পারো
Okay, so is there any question that any one of you asked to your classmates, your friends? If there is any, then you can ask. If there is not, then we'll wind it up here. And primarily I was wanting to just observe that whether you have read the text or not. That was my intention primarily. So yeah, that's done. That's done. And yeah, as PT ma'am has pointed out that this is the first or preliminary stage, and from here you need to move on. You need to add on certain more more original sort of an insights are always original. What I mean is more original observations, so that you find in the text that we haven't seen into the text, right? So your own points, and that actually presentations are meant for that, but we will cover it up in some other day. I hope it will happen naturally and gradually. And one more thing is that whenever you are writing the reason why we are just checking out that whether you have read the text or not, so whenever you have to write all these parts anywhere, in the conclusion you give your opinion as well. Opinion by opinion, I mean your critical understanding of the text. So just keep that in mind as well. So yeah, I am switching off the recording mode. It's turned off.